What do you want?
To see you.
How did you find me?
You changed your name. Is that difficult?
One day, Una sees the neighbor's car, so she goes into her yard and heads to the tool shed. Many years later, Una, now grown up, dances alone in a club, then goes to the restroom with a new guy. Before sunrise, she sneaks home for a shower. Later, she looks at a newspaper picture of a man and his workers. When her mom, Andrea, checks on her, Una hides the paper. After a while, Una gets ready and calls about an address. Before she goes out, Andrea asks when she'll be back, and Una isn't sure. On the way to where she's going, Una stays in the car, unsure about continuing. Meanwhile, her mom looks at old photos of Una. In one, there's a man with his face scratched out. While driving, someone from work calls Una, wondering why she's not there. Una lies, saying she's taking her mom to the doctor. 15 years ago, Una was told she'd have to answer questions in court. She was told to speak toward a camera. Una asked if she could tell Ray something, but she couldn't. Facing the camera, she asked Ray why he left. Now, Una reaches the warehouse parking lot and fixes her makeup. As she walks in, Una recalls riding a Ferris wheel with the man when she was younger, making her sick by the bushes. She rinses her mouth with water to get rid of the bad taste. Inside, the workers stare at her. Una goes into a small room, hoping to talk to the boss. A worker, Scott, asks if she's lost. Una tells him she's looking for Ray, but he doesn't know anyone by that name. She shows him the newspaper clipping, and he says the person she wants is Peter, his boss. They go up, and Scott calls Peter, and Peter seems surprised to see her. A moment later, the man leads Una to the empty break room for privacy. Initially hesitant, he doesn't close the door, but Una insists and firmly shuts it. Peter questions how she found him, so Una shows him the newspaper photo. Confused, Peter asks why she's there, and Una admits she just wanted to see him. Annoyed, Peter suggests they go outside to avoid being seen by his employees. But Una defiantly takes a seat. As he's about to leave, Una addresses him by his real name, causing Peter to stay. Doubtful, Peter asks why he should trust her. Una mentions how his face turned pale when he saw her, as if he'd seen a ghost. Then, she asks how many inappropriate relationships he's had with young women, and he claims none. So, Una challenges him by suggesting she show her birthmark, the one he kissed when he promised they'd always be together. 15 years ago, Peter and Una sat at a picnic table when a family approached. To avoid suspicion, the teen pretended Peter was her father, saying they were waiting to catch a ferry to the mainland. Nowadays, the woman shows him the picture again, expressing disdain at how she's smiling in it, as though he's forgotten what he did. She mentions that, if their relationship had been discovered 6 months later, he would have been put on the offender registry, stopping him from starting anew. Peter argues that he served his time, but Una insists that the 4 years he spent in prison weren't enough for what he did to her. She reveals that her father, who once considered Peter a friend, was never the same after the incident and died in a tragic accident years later. Una shares that her father had intended to seek out and harm the man. When Una rummages through her purse, Peter, feeling paranoid, thinks she's reaching for a weapon, so he grabs her bag and empties it on the table, finding nothing suspicious. 15 years ago, on the same day Una entered the backyard, Peter returned a hedge trimmer he had borrowed from her father, revealing himself to be the family's neighbor. In the present, Peter admits he changed his last name to Trevelyan, a name he randomly selected from a phone book. Back then, after a spat with her friend, Una joined the neighborhood gathering in the backyard. Peter came over, teasing her playfully and stealing glances all afternoon. Nowadays, Peter's coworker interrupts their conversation in the break room to inform him that Mark was looking for him. He asks Una to wait in the car while he attends the meeting. Back in the past, Una questions Peter's presence at the public pool. Instead of answering, Peter praises her swimming skills and suggests she'd beat him in a race. They then dive into the water, engaging in a breath-holding contest while curious onlookers watch. Later, Una's friends inquire about the man, and she explains he's their neighbor and his father's friend. Currently, Una checks her phone and notices 4 missed calls from her worried mother. During the trial, instead of responding to the solicitor's questions, the teen directs her inquiries to Ray. She wanted to understand why he abandoned her at the beach motel on their final day together. Then, she professed her love for him, stirring disapproving murmurs in the courtroom. Back at home, Una's furious father punched the wall, injuring his hand. In the present, despite Peter's request for her to wait in the car, the woman explores the offices. During the meeting, the unsettled man struggles to convey the company's directive to lay off 6 employees. Mark tries to intervene, but Peter proceeds to read off a list of names, claiming it was forced upon him by upper management. Upon noticing Una observing from the hallway, he abruptly leaves the room, leaving the workers bewildered. Mark searches for him, prompting Peter to hide in a stockroom. Later, the boss questions Scott about Peter's whereabouts, and when Scott refuses to disclose, Mark reveals that Peter had included him on the layoff list. Meanwhile, Una inquires about Peter's marital status, and he responds that he's been married for 4 years, but has no children. When she questions if his wife is aware of his past, he confirms and expresses gratitude for finding a woman who accepts him. Nonetheless, Una argues there must be something awry with his wife. Hearing Scott call his name, Peter hurriedly pulls Una into an empty room to conceal themselves. He explains that he fought hard for his new life after losing everything. This statement incenses Una, who reminds him of her 15 years of suffering without the luxury of changing her name. She recounts enduring endless gossip and being attacked by his then-girlfriend. As Scott searches the room, the pair hides behind a stack of boxes. Moments later, Peter asks about the attack, and Una reveals that years after the trial, the woman slapped her while shopping with her mother. Peter reminisces about Una leaving notes on his car's windshield wiper, filled with derogatory remarks about his girlfriend. The memory amuses them, and Una confesses her embarrassment over her teenage crush actions. However, Peter reassures her, affirming her determination and wisdom beyond her years. He remembers the secret codes they shared during their relationship, like calling her house and hanging up after one ring to signal he was home alone, and his car, facing right, meant they'd meet in the park. Peter acknowledges he should have ended the relationship, but didn't, because he believed he loved her. Now as an adult, Una understands that he brought a blanket to their secluded moments behind the park trees to prevent her clothes from getting dirty and raising suspicions. He clarifies he didn't want to get caught so they could continue seeing each other. He emphasizes they both knew the risks involved in starting the relationship, which appalls Una, prompting her to stand up and leave. Later, Peter finds Una in the restroom and stands outside the closed cubicle. Then, Una recounts the first time they made love in the beach motel on their final day together. She recalls him saying he was going out, so she eagerly awaited his return, anticipating the treat she knew he would bring her. 15 years ago, Una searched for Peter tirelessly. She scoured the motel lobby, the nearby convenience store, and the local pub. Desperate, she even told the bartender she was looking for her father, but upon not finding him, she promptly departed. In the present, Una reveals that when the authorities eventually located her, she never disclosed what occurred. However, the police and doctors informed her of Peter's actions after examining her. They revealed that after he took her innocence, he vanished. Una expresses her hatred for her life following their relationship, feeling compelled to confront him because she believes he wouldn't have known otherwise. When they hear Mark approaching, Una let Peter to enter, leaving him alone with her in the cubicle to hide. After Mark departs, Peter confesses he never left her that day. He claims he went to the pub for a drink to clear his head before they were supposed to run away together. However, upon his return to the motel, she was gone. 15 years ago, Peter searched for Una at the pub, but left abruptly when the bartender and regulars became suspicious. In the present, the man admits his lawyers advised him to claim he left her, as it would appear better in court. 15 years ago, Peter phoned the police to report Una's disappearance and to turn himself in. Back at the warehouse, they returned to the break room after briefly entering the bar, finding it deserted. With everyone else gone for the day, he insists they can't linger in the building since he's expected home. When Una questions if his wife knows he returned to the motel for her, he denies it. Una realizes he never disclosed his dark secret to his wife, prompting the exasperated man to justify keeping it concealed. She probes about his wife's age, and he reveals she's a year older than him. Upset, Una throws an object towards him, demanding to know if he's attracted to his wife's older appearance. To calm her, Peter embraces her until she settles down. Moments later, he inquires if she's still upset. He then asks if she has a boyfriend, to which she replies, no. Suddenly, he sweeps the objects off the tables, and she joins in, venting frustration by trashing the room for a few moments. Peter admits he often thought about her over the years and wondered how she'd grow up. Una heads to the lockers, with Peter following closely behind. In the dimness, the pair kisses, sheds their clothes, and reclines on the floor. Just before proceeding further, the man expresses his inability to continue, prompting her to inquire if she's too old. However, he remains silent, stands up, and prepares to depart. On his way out of the building, Scott confronts him, so Peter shows him the list and assures him his name isn't on it. He then requests Scott to ensure Una exits the warehouse before locking up. Finding Una in the break room, Scott informs her of Peter's departure. Outside, she invites the worker for a drink. Back at home, Peter tidies up the kitchen and feeds the dogs. 15 years ago, the man and the teenager stood on the beach, and he gestured toward the direction they would take once aboard the ferry. In the present, Scott questions why Una refers to Peter as Ray, but she brushes it off as a lengthy tale. She then changes her mind and suggests they have a drink at his place. Meanwhile, Peter's wife, Yvonne, arrives home. In the bedroom, she gently wakes the man, and they become intimate. Meanwhile, Una and Scott engage in intimacy on the couch after sharing a few drinks. Suddenly, Una begins to cry, prompting Scott to ask if she's okay. She requests him to give her a ride to Peter's house, claiming he's her father. Afterwards, Una calls her mother to express her realization that Andrea chose to ignore the traumatic experience as if it never happened to her daughter. Back in the bedroom, Una changes into one of Scott's ex-girlfriend's dresses, and he compliments her appearance. She invites him to accompany her to the party, and when he hesitates, she kisses him. Eventually, they arrive at the party, where Yvonne fails to recognize Una, leading the man to realize Una lied about being Peter's daughter. Upon noticing the unexpected guest, the man requests to speak with Scott privately. In the meantime, Una asks Yvonne about the duration of her and Peter's relationship, to which Yvonne responds, 4 years. Then, Una wonders if Yvonne is happy with the marriage, and the sad expression on Yvonne's face speaks volumes. At that moment, a furious Peter orders Scott to escort Una out of the house. Scott's serious tone confirms his suspicion that they aren't family. Despite Scott's attempts to find a reason for Una to leave, she refuses and heads to the bathroom. Upstairs, Una enters a girl's room and lies down on the bed. 15 years ago, while they were on the Ferris wheel, Peter confessed his love for Una, and they held hands. In the present, Peter's stepdaughter discovers Una lying on her bed. Suddenly, Peter appears, prompting Una to quickly exit the room and leave the house. Outside, Yvonne, Scott, and the other guests witness Peter chasing after Una. Peter knows she suspects him of mistreating his stepdaughter, but he vehemently denies it. He pleads with her to believe that he never engaged in inappropriate relationships after her. Then, he gently caresses her face, kisses her on the cheek, and assures her she was the only one. Una turns around and walks alone along the street, unsure if she'll ever find the closure she desperately needs to move forward with her life.